Hi, and welcome to Katie's Classroom. I'm Katie, your host. And today's episode it's a part two to a conversation I had, but in some ways it's also a part one to the conversation because when I get into the energy of emotional manifesting generator, all of a sudden now I'm a manifesting generator and I'm skipping steps. And one of the questions that Emily Adams asked me on our podcast, which I will link once I receive that here so you can listen to both parts. She asked me, like, how do you help have generators make decisions? But the whole context of the conversation was around leaders and how leaders can do those things. And I always default to communication when I talk to leaders because that's where the breakdown happens. And I didn't fully address that question the way I wanted to, which is why I'm doing a bonus episode here on Katie's Classroom for you. So I think what's important that I wanted to highlight for generators, whether you're a manifesting generator or non, emotional or non, generator means the sacral is defined. 70% of the population has this sacral defined, and that's really important because that's the majority of us. And it shoots off in 8 different directions from the sacral, like different energies. And so I don't ever say, hey, as a generator, here's what you should do. That's what Ra did to sell a system. And then there's so much more nuance, which is why, like an onion, you can keep staying on a treadmill of information. I like to just pierce right through to the stuff that's important. And so when we look at the sacral, we have different centers that could potentially plug into the sacral, creating what we would call a generator. BG5 Business Institute calls that a classic builder, which is what I'm going to focus on versus or an express builder. That's the manifesting generator. So the generator part that I focus on is that classic builder where there's no connection, no motor connection to the throat. So the sacral center connects to the drive and stamina center. The root is what that's called in human design. And the root is a pressure center. And it's important that you're aware that it's a pressure center because if someone is a generator and they have one of the energies, they're called format energies that are connecting to their drive and stamina, then this is a pressure. A pressure is a pulse. Pressures and pulses turn on and they turn off. And while we would like to be able to turn humans on with a button like a robot, that is not the way these pulses work. I have one of those format energies, and I have two hanging energies and the other two. And when I'm with my husband, we actually have all three format energies. We're a very powerful house, which makes sense why we want to have the owls in and host people. If you follow me and you know what we do, he's the executive chef, coordinating it all. And the format energy I have is the 952. So when I look at a generator and how they make decisions, number one thing you need to know is the sacral is dumb. Nobody likes that word, doesn't quite mean what it means, but those are Ra's words actually from one of his lectures. The sacral is not an awareness center. It is dumb in that sense. It is a gut response, and it's just responding into, can I mutate this? The answer is no, I don't want to do it. It makes sense why I would decide not to go to certain parties or certain events because my body is like, yeah, there's nothing there for you to change, to mutate. That's what mutation is. The 952 that I have is rooted in logic circuitry. So you know that when you walk into the room with me as a generator, my gut, when I'm saying, like there's logic there. That's what the 952 is focused on. Where if I was in the 360, which is the format energy in the middle, that is an individual knowing energy. It is an innovative energy. The 3 is very much a type A energy. It likes to order things. And the 60 just has to recognize what its limitations are in order to transcend them. But that is a true pulse, the 360, where it's on or it's off, it's on or it's off. And it can be off for many, many moons. And so many moons that people that have that energy may not realize that they actually are innovative and like to create out of nothing because it's just off and it hasn't worked in a while. I've had that client. And so knowing that person is going to be responding from, can I innovate this or not? Can I mutate this or not? Because again, that's what the sacral is interested in. The other energy, the 4253, and I have the 42 in my emotional quotient, and the 60 is in my Mercury. So the 4253 moves in cycles. And so when a generator is responding from this space, it's this is part of my cycle. It's a place that I need to either finish the cycle, it's a place in the beginning, in the middle, the end, but it is all about cycles. Cycles can happen very quickly, cycles can happen a very long time. But those with that energy, they have to finish the cycle and they know they need to finish that cycle properly. Otherwise, they'll have to repeat it when they start a new cycle. And so that's ultimately what their sacral response is going towards. So if you're asking yes or no, this or that questions, you need to be aware of what is the sacral actually responding to, because the sacral is not an awareness center. What's interesting about the emotional center is it is an awareness center, but it's also a motor. And so because of that, and not only is it a motor and an awareness center, but it also doesn't have any logic. And so therefore it's not based in logic and we can't make decisions on it. So that's why we have to wait over time for that to appear, because there's no logic circuitry in the emotional center. Where just in the sacral, you could have some logic. And I'll talk about the 34 and where that connects if you were to have some logic, or the 27 where that connects to have some logic, because the intuition center, the spleen, that isn't a logic. That is where logic lives. And so you can have a generator like myself, who 952, I'm dumb, but yes, I can mutate that. And I also connect to the 34, 57, 10. And so that 34, 57, which is intuition, that is looking at awareness of the power and what we can do with it. But if you have a generator that just has a format channel, which overrides the whole system, like mine does, um, remembering that the sacral doesn't have a, yep, that's going to work out great if we just listen to me. And I think that's sort of the myth that shows up as leaders try to work with this. What's your gut say? Like, that's important, but recognizing that the gut is speaking in a specific way. Is this, and so like the 42, 53 and the 952 are both logic circuitries. One's logic, one's abstract, it's experiential. We don't actually have wisdom until the cycle is over. And so trying to find wisdom within the cycle is not wise, because the wisdom shows up at the end, versus the 952 myself, where I'm always trying to rework in the middle of it. I'm ready to pivot because logic says if we have a quick little test here and it doesn't go well, that we should pivot. Where experiential says, let's continue with this experience until we know what we know. And then again, the individual knowing. So that drive and stamina center, it's a pressure center. It's the adrenals. It gives us drive. And so I am driven to follow this. And what's important to know that about generators that are connected to their drive and stamina center is that is a format energy. It will override their whole system. The 952 is the most mutative of all the energies. Me simply walking to a room starts to reorganize it, which makes sense why, as a high school teacher in North Side, South Side Chicago, both environments, where kids that were in trouble in other classes were doing great in mine, because I am mutating the environment simply by being there. And if you're in my energy long enough, you will mutate right along with me. Which is why it's important for my pressure center that's defined up here to be broadcasting good things for you. Moving up from that, you have the identity center that connects to the sacral. And so now we have what they call the tantra energies. And 90s Dan has two of the three tantra energies. And the one in the middle is the one that we're always seeking so that we can scale and provide vision and direction. The 515, if they're a 515 generator, you know that they are going to set the rhythm for the house. That is how the 515 works. They also will probably have a lot of plants. And if you've been to my home, you know that is also true. Again, there is not logic in the sacral. Like, the energies can have logic. The 515 is part of the logic circuitry. But again, the sacral itself is not an awareness center. It's just a motor. And so when we understand what that sacral is trying to do as a motor function, it's just wanting to mutate the system. So if we leave at 10:10 and I wanted to leave at 10 o'clock, we just trust the timing of the 515, because they'll forget something. Like, the 515 is going to leave when the 515 is wanting to leave. That's the rhythm and routine. And so being aware that they can only answer from that space, yep, that's going to fit into my fixed rhythm, that's not going to fit into my fixed rhythm, that's really the answer that they're providing. So if you ask them a question about work that they're meant to do, you're really going to want to listen for that sacral response, because the 5 is so fixed. Same thing with a 952. You really got to listen and lean into that response, because if it's not there, they won't do it. And then you have the other half of that. So that one's the logic, the 515. So it moves from the 952 to the 515 for logic circuitry. The 4253 logic circuitry moves to the 4629. So if you have a generator that's coming specifically just out of the 2946, That is experiential, so they won't have any wisdom until it's over. And that generator is looking at, can I get everybody to say yes to this? And can I get and can I coordinate it? Like those are kind of the that's what the 46 and the 29 are really doing. So the response again, it's all about mutation. Can I get a yes? Can I coordinate this? And because 90s Dan has this, it is interesting to watch how he can get a group to commit to saying yes to something. I get to be part of that group, so does the dog. And part of him being the chef is how he coordinates all of that commitment. If you've committed to a dinner with 90s Dan, you also know you've committed to eating it on the time frame that it shows up. And that is why the name of his kitchen is called Sorry for the Wait. Just to give you an idea of what it's like when you have a generator as a leader on your team. If we trust the timing, and this is where generators can struggle. I've had people that are like, listen, the email, we need to have that email scheduled for 5 o'clock. If I send that email at 5:21, and the right person happens to open their email at 5:22 because they just happen to be in their inbox and they're like, yep, I want to do that. Like Dan's also in lead generation, so this works as a really great analogy. That's who you want making the decision, not an arbitrary, based in absolutely no logic other than we always send it out at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m., whatever that is. Like you want someone who's rooted in some timing. And that's really what the sacral energy source is. It's about timing. Yes, this is a good time for that. No, it's not a good time for that. Timing. And I always tell people I'm rooted in the earth's timing. So is like Dan, like the sacral center is the natural timing of the universe, so to speak. If I'm rooted, because I have my drive and stamina that connects to my sacral. And that's part of why that 952 is so powerful. You also have the 34 and the 27 that come out of the sacral, as well as what's the one that heads into the emotional on the other side. I'm not going to talk about the emotional one because I was focusing on the original podcast on being just a pure generator with an open solar plexus, so no emotional center. So if you have a generator that is just a 3457, I have this client. And so the 34 comes out of the sacral. And so that's their response. And it is strength, which means things are easy. Strength is actually effortlessness. We think of strength as like, ooh, look at him. He really struggled, but he lifted all that weight. But actually, strength is when athletes make things look flawless. Watching Michael Jordan play, like, oh, it made it look so easy. Like that's strength. It's effortless. Look, it's easy as right. If you have that coming out of the sacral, it doesn't, it's again not aware of itself. So we can be a bit of a bully or a pushy or a little bit stubborn because we're not aware of ourselves. But if that connects into the 57, the spleen is an awareness center. And there is logic circuitry in the spleen. So you can get some awareness there. And what my client that just had the 5734, what that looked like for him as a generator was getting feedback about being bullish and pushy. And we tapped into that 57 of listening and bringing more awareness to the space. The analogy I gave him is that the credit card is not out. We don't need to be worried about push. Also, if the credit card is out, we still don't need to push. We can get curious. Credit cards can go back into wallets. If we've already hit send on the purchase, now we're in a different place. And that made all the difference because the sounds and the wanting to push is coming from, again, a sacral that's not intelligent. So it's not that I think what I see a lot in the human design world, which is why that guy wrote a book about how it's a cult, and Ra very much knew what he was doing when he said, hey, only 4% of the population are going to find this, only 2% are going to do anything with it. We've got to keep them because we're not going to find new ones once we tap out, and we keep them on the treadmill, so to speak. And so if you read his stuff and you understand how he speaks and talks, then you don't have to get stuck on that treadmill. And he talks about this specifically. So it's not like we want leaders in the room looking at the sacral. Ooh, what does your sacral say? Because the sacral is just only interested in mutating a system. It's not interested in, or aware rather. It's not aware of things that are bigger than that. That's it. That's what it's rooted in timing. Yeah, is this the right timing to mutate a system? Yes or no? And what that might look like would be me, still finding the right words for the email. That's why I went out at 5:20 instead of 5 p.m. It might look at me, still feeling into it's a feeling. That's really what generators are doing in that is it's a feeling because the sacral has no truth in the now. So it feels different at 5:05 than its truth would be different at 5:20. And so when the truth says now is the time to send the email, if you trust your generators, you might have some pretty great results. My company did that I was supporting. We had 40% increase with the same amount of people that donated. So 40% increase in revenue with the same amount of people giving is a pretty big deal. But if you don't trust your generator, you're going to give them feedback like I received, which was your communications were a little sloppy. You were, behind on stuff. Behind on what? A deadline you invented? And so this is where it can be tricky for generators to enter the corporate space. And that's probably why I never entered the corporate space because I also have a lot of individual energy that says, that's not for you. I mentioned the sacral also having that 27 that connects to the spleen of the 50. I don't think I've actually ever seen anyone with just that. But if that is your sacral inner knowing, then you'll also be aware it's defensive by nature. The 5027 is a tribal energy. And so when you're looking at generators, you have to understand what type of energy is making them a generator, and then what are some of the characteristics that go along with that energy. So the 2750 is a tribal energy. And on that side of the circuitry, it is defensive by nature. I do have this client now that I say that out loud. I remember he's got a couple other generator energies that help him. Um, and so he's very aware of like when he's speaking from this, where he can sound like he's trying to defend something or that he can sound defensive. I don't even know if those are the words quite he used. I think as a Gen Z, or he might have been using some different words, but it meant the same thing. And that's some awareness now that he can bring to his sacral of, when I hear this, my sacral is feeling defensive because that's how he described it as like, I just know this isn't right. Been there. And that's something else that sacrals have is although the sacral itself is not an awareness center, it does have a knowing. That's why it's the authority that Ra assigned it. And I think this also for me is why I've always thought that I'm more of an intuitive authority than I am a gut authority. You have a microbiome in your gut. So, like, who's answering in your gut that's saying, could be, a bug that you picked up 20 years ago that's, we have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria and viruses, as my mom always told me. And so, if you got a little candida overgrowth in there and you're saying, I want sugar, like that's not you. That's the bacteria in your gut. So something that I encourage generators to do is spend some time meditating, deep breathing, and getting to know, like talk to your gut. Who's in there? What are you guys thinking? This sounds a little bit woo for you. There's probably a lot of scientific studies I could link here, but I'm not going to. Remember, the sacral isn't logical anyways. But you do notice people saying a lot. The last thing I wanted to add, when I reflected on my conversation with Emily, was that I had the privilege of being raised by two generator parents. My dad's a pure generator. Pure just means the throat is open. We're only 28% of the population. My mom had the 1762, which I had the 17 as my personality sun, and my dad had the 62. And so when we got together, we were the exception in that we did not, like a lot of times people when they get together are just manifesting generators because of the way their energies work. And we were not. We were just simply a generator family. We were the last ones to show up to every family event, as the generators do. My dad has the 515 as a generator, so he set the timing for the house with his 515. And for myself, like growing up in that, we even when we laugh, we're like, it's like a thing that my husband pointed out that I hadn't even realized is like, yeah, that's a bunch of generators just hanging out together, using their sacral to respond. So when people talk about deconditioning and like learning how to like get to your gut again, I think perhaps that's why it didn't resonate for me as much because it was just something that I was around. And my dad's sisters and my cousins, so like the family that would get together for every single holiday, everybody there I think was a manifesting generator or a projector. So so no generator that you would necessarily see. I'd have to double check on my grandfather who passed away before I found this system. He might be a generator, but I don't know. I think he was a manifesting generator, which would explain why he always had his hand in 7 different business ventures. When I look at my husband's chart, we're both pure generators solo, and we're both pure generators together. And so, although we complete each other in those format energies, and so we really do know, like what we want to do as a couple, makes purchases and things somewhat easy. The sacrals won't always agree with each other, right? Because I've got that 952 and he's got the 515 and the 2946. So we've got, and then we create some energies together. And um, it really allows you just to sink into that generator. So if you're a generator living with a manifesting generator, it can be harder for you to stay in that gut. Um, and when you are a non energy type living with an energy type, it's just helpful for you to recognize, like, we get so into like, this is my identity and this is my chart. And this is where I want to be when I make decisions. But your chart just lets you know, hey, this is what's fixed about me. And energies are mechanics. That's just the way they work. And so knowing that energy are mechanics, you can learn, okay, this is how I enter into things correctly. This is how I initiate things correctly. This is how I remove resistance correctly. But ultimately, we're walking around in a soup of energies, and so it's not like, even though I grew up in a family of pure generators and generators, it's not that every time we stepped out of our house together, we were most likely going to be impacted in a manifesting generator type of way. So some food for thought if you're diving into trying to understand, like, how do I lead myself better, because that's really what the system is for. I have the 1057, which is perfected form, and so oftentimes I'm getting hired to come in because I help perfect the form, which is the physical, and how we're manifesting and how we're moving in the world. Wendy, who does the BG5 analysis for my creative leadership lab, also has the 1057, and she's a manifester, and so she's a splenic authority. And working with a splenic authority is really probably the only one that I would actually call a true authority, in the sense that it has awareness. It's awareness in the now, but it has awareness. And there is logic circuitry in the spleen. So it can even have logic awareness, although that'll just talk itself into a circle. I prefer actually my 1057 awareness than my 1858 awareness, now that I say that out loud. And if you know what that means, you know what that means. So it's important to understand the mechanics of each energy versus just looking at, this is a generator. How do they respond? There's so much more nuance, which is great, because that means I'll always have a job. And you can always come to Katie's classroom to learn more about it. So check out the link that will be in this on how to hear the first podcast. I'm going to be great in the first podcast because I have a manifester. And what was fun about that is, afterwards, I told her, hey, I'm going to borrow your energy's going to linger for a few days. I'm going to ride an emotional wave. But it was really cool for me to be able to observe the 35-36 energy. And it makes sense why I spoke so much about communication, even though she was really asking me from a generator perspective how I use my gut to make decisions. My gut it's more of an informer. So authority to me almost even seems like the wrong word that Ra threw out there. And I think he knew that. It was just an easy way to get you on a interesting treadmill. And if you're on an interesting treadmill, you're going to want to know more about how all the features work and how the buttons work. And that's how you get to the next piece. I hear a lot of people also talk about, for leaders, oh, they have an electromagnetic channel between them. Maybe. So there are the 6 lines, and lines have harmonies and lines have disharmonies. So a 5-1 and a 2-4, for example, are a very harmonic profile together. The 5th line is a harmonic with the 2 line, and the 1 line is a harmonic with the 4 line. So if you're coming together to create an electromagnetic energy, you're going to want to know, okay, well, I have the 5.5, 15.1. Does my partner have the other half, the 5? Is that going to be in the 4 line? If it's not, I may not be in harmony. It doesn't mean it won't be some type of electromagnetic. It's a bad channel if you're really knowing this stuff, because that one is not harmonic anyways. But point being is, if you understand the lines, then you can actually see, is there harmony here, Or is there just familiarity, but not necessarily harmony? And then beyond harmony, because I think you can have harmony even when things are not harmonic, you would then look at, okay, well, if I bring the one line, I'm bringing research and investigation and foundational knowledge. And if they're bringing the sixth line, then they're going to want to educate me, but I'm going to have some wisdom. And so you can look at how we might work together in that. But just simply just say we created an electromagnetic channel isn't nuanced enough. Back to that treadmill that Ra created. It was brilliant. He wanted it, manifestors. He talks about in the Manifestor Manifesto that the best way for a manifestor to make money is to get paid for something they've done years ago. And he set his kids up for a legacy of them getting paid for work that he had done years ago. So something for you to keep in mind if you're listening and you're a manifestor is that your favorite way to get paid for your work is long after it is done. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Katie's Classroom. If you'd like to learn more, go to alprofessionalcoaching.com and sign up for the paid version so you can get better content. Better is probably not the right word, more content.